Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chai Talk for the Left Hook Substack with Wajat Ali, where I interview someone who's usually far smarter than me to break down one or more than one big questions in 30 minutes or less. And today I have Marcus Barham. He is the senior reporter at Capital in Maine, a 30-year news veteran who's very young, by the way, who formerly reported on economics and business for Wall Street Journal and ABC, and also wrote a biography on Gil Scott-Heron. Marcus, thank you so much for joining me, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You have written a lot on Project 2025, on Russell Vought, on the agenda of these, I would call them extremists, Christian nationalists, who want to drown the government in the bathtub, right? To echo the famous quote from Grover Norquist back in the day. And the big question I have for you, with this second Trump administration now entering its almost third week, and with the confirmation of Russell Vought, one of the architects of Project 2025, as the head of the Office of Budget and Management, how is the Trump administration unleashing Project 2025 to dismantle our government and our democracy? It's a big question, but you're the man for the job. And just to get people up to speed, can you remind them exactly what Project 2025 is and what it aims to do?
Certainly. So Project 2025 was a product by the Heritage Foundation, along with a lot of other similarly minded partners on the conservative side who came up with an agenda, basically a roadmap. I think they've actually talked about, I think, how they saw that in 2016, in the first Trump term, there was a lot of chaos and there wasn't much planning. And so they already 2 years ago said, okay, if we come back in office, we're going to be ready. We're going to hit the ground running and have our long-held beliefs carried out and our agenda to really strip down government, keep it to the basics, cut all kinds of programs that we disagree with, obviously attack woke, whatever they consider woke, but also look for any examples of things that they consider unnecessary for the government to do. And I think it's gone way beyond what you saw in the Reagan era, where you saw massive cutbacks to social programs, major tax cuts for the wealthy, and they're taking it a step further. I think by looking at, instead of, in the Reagan era, there was a term called cost benefit analysis, which was
Right.
often used to say, you know what, that's great for corporations, and we're going to apply that to government now too. Where if it's costing too much and there's too much money going out the door to help these people in this community, let's cut that. If we're going to, have some new rule for airlines, a safety rule, and we're going to assess a dollar amount to each human life, and that kind of seatbelt is going to cost too much in terms of how many lives it'll save, then let's just get rid of it or not do it. And that, I think, here you're seeing it on steroids,
Mm.
where beyond the cost benefit analysis, you have this approach, a very technocratic approach, obviously, from Elon and his company and his, cadre of people who are much more focused, I think, on just the ones and zeros, the dollar amounts, no consideration as you do in government for things that aren't profitable. Obviously, whether it's FEMA efforts for disaster aid or whether it's humanitarian assistance, those things are extraneous to them. They can't pin a dollar amount to them, so they're like, all right, that has to go because it's costing.
I want to talk about some of these
I mean, they don't
programs.
see a value in that, is
Yeah,
what I meant.
so some of these programs that we don't see a value in, and I think it's worth exploring because people don't know what's about to happen to them. But I want to talk about some of the players, right? So you mentioned Elon, we're going to talk about him, but another player, Russell Vought. Russell Vought is seen as one of the architects of Project 2025, and he was just unfortunately confirmed as the head of the OMB. He's the OMB director. Can you break down why Russell Vought, in my opinion, is so dangerous into effectuating these ideas and these hopes into now realities as the director of the office of OMB stands for the Office of Management and Budget, right?
Right, right. I mean, and exactly. I mean, we're probably, two of the few people in the country who know what OMB stands for, or even heard that acronym. I mean, unlike, the Pentagon or NIH or other like major or obviously Health and Human Services, OMB tends to be very sort of in the background, but it probably is one of the most important and consequential agencies in the government because it basically sets the agenda for the budget.
Mm,
The government has trillions of dollars. How do they spend that money? What are their priorities? And that comes down to OMB, and they kind of carry out that budgetary process. So Vogt was the deputy director in the first Trump term, then he became director at the very end. And tried to all kinds of drastic proposals, as I say in my article, to cut Medicaid, to cut Social Security, other programs to cut Head Start. And a lot of that was rejected by Congress. So it's kind of interesting where you see like people look back and they're like, well, it wasn't that bad, like in
that's
terms
right.
of these cuts, but mainly because there was a Congress. And obviously, for at least 2 years, there was a Democratic, you know, one of the chambers was controlled by Democrats. So a lot of these extreme cuts, which would have hurt SNAP benefits, Head Start, a lot of other social programs were rejected by Congress at the time. And so now that they have all three branches, they want to hit the ground running and carry out that agenda and go even further. So in part of 2025, which is a massive document, and a lot of reporters were combing through it, during the lead up to the election. It had many, many kind of scary details about things they would do, like eliminating Head Start. A Head Start, a program which has benefited tens of millions of children throughout the country, especially in red states.
Right.
In red states, especially like states like West Virginia, Mississippi, other states, there's almost the highest percentage compared to other states of people who participate, who enroll in Head Start. And this would just, decimate early child care in those states.
And also,
So it had this
go
devastating
ahead. Go ahead.
impact.
No, also, Medicaid, you Head Start, SNAP. You mentioned this in your article that it's the red states, for lack of a better term, that are the ones most dependent on it, right? They're literally going to be hurting their own constituents, and their own
Right.
constituents voted for their own self-destruction. And to really amplify that, we just got some news. David Korn of Mother Jones reported on this. I believe it was yesterday. We're recording this on a Wednesday, that Russell Vought's daughter has cystic fibrosis, and she
Mhm.
essentially got this miracle drug thanks to the NIH, National Institute of Health. And we just got breaking news as of just 30 minutes ago that the National Institute of Health is now allowed to, or is able to then release its funding, because its funding was frozen by Vote and Musk. Just, I mean,
Right.
break that down to me. Like
Right.
his
Right.
daughter is alive because of this drug that is able to get to her through the NIH, and they're like, nah, screw the NIH.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, Vogt doesn't come out of Silicon Valley, but he's sort of aligned, I think, especially with Elon's team at Doge, with this idea that you just go and smash and break things. And that's been sort of how Elon has worked his MO at the companies he's run, where you just kind of go and make a drastic decision. And then if you screw up and have to, clean up an aisle three later, you do it. And so I think they're doing that here, where it's sort of shock and awe campaign, to borrow the Iraq War phrase, to just come in, decimate these agencies,
Mm.
and then, oh, if there's some problems, then we'll go back and clean it up. And so obviously, it's so overwhelming. I think they don't always realize the extent of these programs. They just see them as a waste. That I don't know what was in his mind, but you can see Vogt, not even connecting, perhaps, that his daughter's care is tied in this integral way to NIH and the funding freeze. So you see that a lot, and I think part of it reflects their own ideology, which is very focused on, that you kind of take care of the essentials. Even I think Vogt is a Christian nationalist, and he has this idea that there's concentric circles. So you can see, like, the first thing you take care of is your family, which in this case obviously wasn't, completely carried out. And then you take care of your immediate, neighborhood, and then your community. And then if you're an undocumented immigrant, that's sort of the like lowest priority.
So,
And
I mean, I
so,
think it's very important that you just said this, because this week, J.D. Vance, who converted to Catholicism, gave the Latin term of this,
right,
right? Concentric circles of care. And
right,
then the Pope and I don't think any of these people are more Catholic than the Pope, came out, I believe, yesterday, Pope
Yeah,
Francis, and said, actually, JD Vance, you're wrong.
right,
The concept is of you being a good Samaritan and not, doing a hierarchy of ranking, which is what JD Vance and Russell Vogt, who is a Christian nationalist,
right.
propose. And
Yeah,
which
no,
they're failing at already because
right.
literally, if his daughter was needed this medicine right now, she would die. So he's already failing at that.
Right. No, I mean, it is kind of shocking. I mean, and that thing with JD Vance's speech kind of struck me. It echoed when I was researching this story about a month ago, I was combing through all these old speeches that Russell Vought had given to these obscure sort of far right groups. And one of them was literally, I think the title of it was a Christian justification for limiting immigration. Like that was the name of the panel discussion.
Wow.
And in that speech, Vote, this is like, I think it took place in 2023. He talks about the concentric circles explicitly, and he talks about how he actually is even doubtful that we should have legal immigration because the country is on the verge of civil war. It's just going to foment division. We don't need that trouble. And he makes all these claims. I think he cites some biblical passages that people always use about helping, the poor, those who are needy, those, wonderful passages that have inspired millions of people. And he was like, yeah, but not when it comes to a country that's, has other priorities. So it's like, all right, I thought Jesus was talking about love and helping the lame and the vulnerable. I guess not always. Is that what the argument is
With an
here?
asterisk. Yeah, only.
Yeah, yeah. Like just check the fine print. Oh, not this year.
Yeah, a
No
Palestinian
problem.
in the Middle East was really concerned
Oh,
about saving white American lives, a country that wasn't even born. But
right,
you mentioned this, and I want to give a number at it because you mentioned in your article what they actually want to cut, right? And so what Vote wanted during the first term was, I want to read this. He proposed a $1.3 trillion cut to Medicaid, Medicare,
right,
and
right,
Social Security, and 451 billion to Medicare and 920 billion to Medicaid. Well, it was in 2020 he wanted that, and then these numbers were for 2021. So if you add that all up, that is essentially, my God, like nearly, we're looking at $3 billion. And that also matches up quite nicely, Marcus, with the math to the tax cuts.
right, right, right. Which some people have made that connection that, that's an argument that's been, said expressed by, I think, AOC and others, is that they have to pay for the extension of the tax cuts. The tax cuts already cost a lot because they were, passed in 2017. So they've been around now for 7 years, 8 years, and they'll probably be extended at the end of this year. And so someone's got to pay for those trillions. And so you're obviously going to have to just slash, slash, slash wherever you can. And most of the spending in the federal government, besides defense, is obviously these social programs like Social Security and Medicaid. I mean, the thing that I'm not sure if this, is something I would consider the best or most, maybe it's a little naive, is that I think Trump himself actually is, kind of knows how far he can go, and he knows, and I think deep down in terms of survival, that cutting Social Security and cutting Medicare, as well as Medicaid, might be kind of a
A bridge
stupid
too
move
far.
because it's just going to piss off a lot of people. So I can see him like a lot of threats, but then at the end, especially with Social Security, kind of pulling back and being like, whoa, 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 I can't do that. Just because, maybe not even in terms of empathy, but just in terms of political survival.
But historically, I'm glad you mentioned that because Republicans have been on it for a while. Since Reagan's times, and each time they've gone power and flirted with it, the backlash has been severe. But they've never had this type of power, Marcus, and this type of, if you will, extreme people with an agenda. And my take on this is, I say it seems like it's President Musk. I don't know if you saw that Oval Office interview yesterday. I've never
I
seen
did,
anything like
yeah.
that in my life,
Yeah.
where the president is sitting quietly as Elon Musk, who last time I checked is not elected, is a special government employee, but hasn't been confirmed from the Senate, is the one addressing the nation, and his kid is staring at Trump while picking his nose.
Right.
I mean, talk to me about Elon Musk's role in essentially bulldozing this agenda through, because you got Vote, who I'm sure is wealthy, but he doesn't have FU money, and he seems very ideologically aligned as a Christian nationalist. And then you got Musk, who, at least ideologically, in the past 2 years, pro AFD, pro Nazis and white supremacists on X, pro Doge, efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. But he's received billions of dollars, right? That's what's interesting. He's not going to cut the billions of dollars that he's gotten, but now
Yeah.
he's going to go after USAID, NIH. What's Musk's role, and how is he kind of like a maybe he's a variable here that they can't control?
Yeah, no, that's a good point that you made there at the end, because I'm not sure if they can control him. And I think there's going to be, as everyone has predicted, there will be at some point an impasse. And he's already apparently annoying Trump. You can see in some of the photos in Mar-a-Lago, Trump is like, oh, vey, this guy, he's driving me nuts. This geek has to go. And so, but I think he's a very effective kind of soldier. Like, Trump sees, I mean, Trump, for all of his not really knowing facts, I think he reads people very well in a very almost like um, survival of the fittest type way, Darwinian way. So I think he sees like, okay, I can use this smart guy. This nerd is going to come to my advantage because I can just, flatter him, and then he's going to come in and do all the dirty work, all that stuff that getting into the weeds and looking through documents and massive databases. He and his team of geeks will do that. And I can focus on the bigger agenda and just sit in the Oval Office. And Musk, for his, I can't read his mind, but I think for him, it's just a matter of like, he really is sort of a boy at heart. He just is like, wow, I don't think he needs money. I don't think it's about money for him. It's just about like, oh, wow, look, I'm in the White House now and I can pick up his phone and call this guy and make him do this. It's just like, it's like an ego boost for him. And he does have a very strong agenda. I mean, if you see speeches in the past, Elon has denounced regulations. He's
Right.
even said, I don't think we need regulations. Like he's been that explicit, that far reaching. And he's also had sort of a management philosophy, which basically consists of, like I mentioned before, that kind of cost benefit analysis. Basically, all that matters is inputs and outputs. And to be profitable, you just got to lower the inputs so that the costs are lower. So I think he sees it almost as like an intellectual game. He's like, I get to go into like NIH and I go into USAID and I'm going to find, hey, I'm going to list, the 30 biggest, most expensive programs. We'll just cut those. And there's no sense of like, oh, well, hold on, that's humanitarian assistance for, HIV and AIDS medication for people in the Sudan, whatever. It's all numbers.
And,
So
and
for
it's
him, it's
numbers
just
that
a
benefit him.
very, what's
It,
that?
it's numbers that benefit him and his buddies Peter Thiel and David Sachs and the
Right.
oligarchy. And like you said, he's going after all the consonants and letters that have any regulation: SEC, FTC,
Right.
FAA,
Right.
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, anything that's gone after him.
Yeah.
And so now his fingers are in the cookie jar. And I think you're right that Donald Trump is like, all right, I'll unleash you, but don't get too big for your britches. Because right now it seems like he's got the big boy pants on, Marcus, and he has the money. And so far, 3 weeks into this presidency, what he says seems to go, and
Hmm.
all the Republicans seem to bend the knee both to Donald and to Elon. And your article also mentions this is that I'm talking about overreach now because it seems like as of right now they've gone too far. As of this recording, already about 3 weeks in, we see judges say, you can't end birthright citizenship. You can't unilaterally freeze funding
Right.
that Congress has approved. You can't unilaterally kill a government agency without congressional approval. But they're like, whatever, we'll do whatever we want. But nonetheless, as you mentioned, it's these red states that really benefit from these programs, right? USAID buys $2 billion worth of commodities from farmers. That's gone now. And so you mentioned people like Susan Collin of Maine's. Uh, the state has poverty, and
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and so let's just play this out. Suppose they overreach here. Suppose no one reins them in. How do you see this playing out, especially for the Republican senators and elected officials who are complicit at this moment?
Yeah, in terms of how it plays out, it's hard to say. I mean, you can easily see, even though the Democrats are completely weak, and when most people they've been in like how many years, 30
Yeah,
years since Reagan,
completely
you
impotent right
can you
now,
can
right?
see it completely imploding and backfiring on the Republicans, and all of a sudden, in massive midterm bounce for the Democrats. That could happen, or I think there's so much misinformation out there. Like you saw that with USAID, where everyone focused on this fake story about, what was it, condoms in Gaza, which actually was
But it was
not even
Gaza, Mozambique.
right, right, and was totally, untrue, but it kept getting repeated ad nauseum by elected officials and people in Congress.
White House press
Meanwhile,
secretary.
yeah, I mean, meanwhile, no one looks at how USAID also, like you said, mentioned, the farmer to farmer program, which mainly helps American farmers and makes them more efficient and makes them, you know, easier and make money with putting food on the table, which hurts a lot of red states in the heartland. So it's hard. I think one of those things that 10 years ago you could have easily said, or 20 years ago, wow, this is going to backfire on them because people in those red states are going to suffer and they're going to hold them to account. But in this age of fragmented information, you can imagine like people, some Trump supporters in Kansas or in Alabama who are only getting their news from, you name it, Hot Air or Breitbart or elsewhere, that complex, they're going to get the spin that the White House is putting out, and which you already see on Twitter nonstop. And they'll see, okay, our lives are lousier, but there must be other people to blame,
That's right.
whether it's immigrants or
That's right.
whether it's people of color or whether it's government agents, IRS agents, sneaking through our backyards. That's what's going to happen, I think, in a very cynical way. You're going to have that sort of misdirection. I mean, you already see it how they're spinning. I called it like incredibly Orwellian, where some of the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, changes, and they sent out this memo about 2 days ago that two of the biggest reforms under Biden were, one, to you wouldn't medical debt wouldn't show up in your credit
Right.
report because there's so much medical debt, and the other one was, I think, to rein in overdraft fees, which everyone hates and really hurts the poor and working class. So they got rid of those reforms. And in the announcement from the White House announcing it, they had all these other things like kind of anti-woke agenda, like, oh, there was some equitable program at the
They said hire
CFPB.
women.
Got rid of that. Yeah, whatever, like woke things, they kind of listed a whole bunch of them, and like, how silly is that? We got rid of it. And then at the very bottom, they mention, oh, also we basically got rid of these rules that were about regulating Americans' checking accounts. And that was the way
Mm,
they spun. Oh, you don't have to, helping you from, predatory medical lenders and medical debt, protecting you from, overzealous banks and overdraft fees. That all of a sudden becomes like regulating Americans' checkbooks, which sounds sort of, nefarious.
deep state,
That's how they
right?
spun it. That's how they
I,
spun it.
I agree with you
It
and your
probably worked for a
cynicism.
lot of people. Probably people out there saw that and were like, yeah, all right, good. Government's out of my checking account. I
I
don't want
agree with your cynicism, and I've always said for the past 10 years that we've lost about a third of Americans in my lifetime. No matter what happens, I think they're just people, but they've been radicalized by right-wing information. And no matter what we do, I'm sure you've talked to these people. It's like, they're on Earth 3. But for the rest of
yeah.
us, I want to ask you these two questions, Marcus. You've been following business economics for 30 years. You and I think, are on the same page here that this overreach is going to be disastrous for the American people. Uh, if you could look at a crystal ball, no one could predict anything. But if this continues, which it will, because they have the presidency, the Supreme Court, the House, and the Senate, and now the tariff war, as of I think yesterday, 2 days ago, Donald Trump re-implemented tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. Right?
Right.
Play this out for us, because I don't think you've seen anything like this in the past 30 years. Play this out next year. Like, what does the U.S. economy, what does the workforce, what does the mood look like?
I think there'll be a lot of anger, because I think part of like distracting people from the policy decisions you make and these rules, decimating these rules and these agencies that are helping Americans, is to distract them with anger, like we mentioned before, kind of having them look at different targets. So it'll be like a constant culture war. Like the culture wars used to be a thing during elections. Like, oh, during an election, you'd hear about guns, gods, and gays.
That's
That
right.
became sort of the Republican mantra. And now I think it's going to be like a 24/7 news cycle of the latest culture war. Oh, what kind of crazy thing was Kendrick doing at the halftime show? What an awful, like, heathen,
He's so
and
black.
yeah, oh my God, he was so terrible and scary and weird, and dangerous. but that'll be like every day there'll be something new to latch onto. And I think some people will kind of get tired of it. It'll be exhausting, like what happened with, Trump 1.0. People get tired, and there will be people who I think were sort of in the middle, who were just pissed off at Biden and worried about inflation and weren't necessarily the biggest Trump fans. And there will be like, 20, 30% in the middle who are just like, this isn't working out too well. I took a bet it wouldn't be chaotic and terrible, and it is turning out that way. Um, but there'll definitely be, again, that, base who are just really, really convinced no matter what happens. Like it always reminds me, I think I tweeted this a few weeks ago, that during COVID, there was a guy, some old guy who was dying of COVID,
Yeah,
who had been like a total anti-vax guy. And even on his deathbed, he was like, nope, it's terrible. It's like, crazy. It's Fauci. It's a conspiracy. Even on his deathbed, it was more important to own the libs
that's right.
than ever admit, oh, yeah, maybe I was wrong about the vaccines. I mean,
Jonathan Metzl wrote this book called Dying of Whiteness, and he has an exact similar example of a person who was literally dying, but to spite and own the libs, he refused
mm,
to get on Obamacare. And I don't know if you've seen this week, a video has
right.
gone viral about a farmer. He's crying, like, he's
Mm,
like, I'm losing my farm. And
yeah,
everyone's like, it's because of Donald Trump. But he's like, but I'm an unrepentant Trumper, as he's literally crying and begging people to help his farm. And as you can imagine, people are trolling him. It
right.
reminds me, this is the final question I have for you, Marcus. I'm old enough to remember 9/11 and America losing its mind. And I, unlike so many of my friends, was not shocked and surprised that George W. Bush won in 2004, even though he's
Mhm.
terrible. Americans learn the hard way, and oftentimes they don't learn. But it took 6 years or so of pain. I remember six to
Yeah,
7 years of immense pain and suffering for enough Americans to wake up and be like, oh my, what did I just do? Right.
right, right,
And then they're like, let's vote for a black guy, a black Muslim.
right, right. A guy with a middle name Hussein. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, everyone who says
Um,
things are settled, I'm like, no, you never know.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but looking at it and having covered this, what's a way forward? What's a way for people, if not the Democrats, to actually fight back against this, as Russell Vought and Elon Musk are literally coming after Head Start, Meals on Wheels, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and helping the rich get richer and the oligarchy assume control?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually a way forward is I think there'll be a surge in populism. And that what you're going to have is, I think the Republicans, Trump has kind of tapped into that with his own kind of nativist populism. And you have obviously on the left, you had the Bernie populism,
Hmm.
which, the corporate Democrats rejected. And I think you could have, in the most optimistic scenario, you could have sort of a little bit of an alliance of those kind of forces where some of the more right-leaning populists kind of join, and there's a surge in like, you know what? We reached a breaking point. Like when things get really bad, if that happens in a year from now, where all these programs and people, there's a lot more poverty, more homelessness, people being screwed by their banks, losing jobs, because of instability from the tariffs and chaos. And it could be one of those moments where, like, once you hit the bottom, there's nowhere else to go up. That people kind of realize, okay, maybe we should be addressing these
Hmm.
power structures like the financial system, and like, other systems that keep us down, and we can demand more. We can demand, more from our wealthy, neighbors to do more, and programs that help. Um, Otherwise, it's just like a recipe for more and more chaos and just this kind of vicious cycle of things declining and then more culture wars being fomented and everyone's at each other's throats. And that doesn't end well, of course. No one wants that. No one wins. But yeah, it's like there's a fork in the road and you have either of those paths. Um,
Well, America had a fork in the road in 2024. It chose unwisely. But sometimes you have to fall down to get back up again. Let's hope enough people learn. Marcus, thanks so much for reporting on
yeah.
your articles. I'll link to it. Marcus Baram is a senior reporter at Capital in Maine, 30-year news veteran. Marcus, shamelessly promote yourself. How can people support you, follow you, read you?
Oh, excellent. Well, follow me on Capital in Maine, where I do a lot of reporting. And now I'm kind of focused on all these efforts through Doge and Musk and what what Russell Vought are doing in DC. So that's kind of my beat for the next 6 months.
You'll be very busy, sir.
And with that,
You'll be very busy.
yes, yes, and I hope to go to DC too to ask some good follow-up questions because it kills me when I go and look on, CNN and they never ask a follow-up question when the lawmaker just skips it and refuses to answer. So I hope to go to DC and do some reporting down there. That'll be my main beat is covering that and all these things that we're talking about, covering that in depth over the next 6 months and probably more.
And
So
what's the name of the book that you wrote?
it's called Pieces of a Man. Gil Scott Heron, Pieces of a Man.
And if you want to understand why Kendrick did what he did during the Super Bowl halftime show, read Marcus's book. It'll make sense. Thank you
Yes,
all
yes.
for watching another episode of Chai Talk with Wajazli for the Left Hook Substack. As always, stay safe, stay kind, and please don't be a fascist.